Hello and welcome to the BA Brew. I'm Pete.
I'm John.
Oh, I'm Debbie.
And today we're going to be talking about the BA role and AI. So if I can go to you first, John, I understand that you've been looking into automation and of course the next thing that's coming along and it's hot on everyone's lips nowadays, AI. What sort of things have you been looking at in particular that relate to how a BA could start to use AI a bit more?
I mean, we've been spending a lot of time recently. Over recent times, looking at how we can use tools like Gen AI. That's something we've definitely been looking at. But more holistically, we've been looking at automation for some time actually. So as we think about business process, when we work with stakeholders, understand what it is that they're doing, the steps that they're conducting, and understanding which of those steps may be currently manual or may be used in tools, maybe in efficient ways or inefficient ways. That's often a starting point, really, just understand what's happening today. And I think as we start to think about process, I think it's quite natural to think about how you might optimize it, and that optimization can come through improving the way we work as individuals, but also through using automation as one example. So that's very much probably the lens that we've been looking through probably for some time, I would say. But AI as a term has become quite prevalent recently, but that's probably the foundational reason we think about it.
So I think there's two aspects here, then, isn't there? I mean, there's one which is how we could use AI to help the role of the BA and to help become more effective BAs ourselves. But there's also about the potential that AI has within organizations to help with things like automation, as you've mentioned, and efficiencies, and to get better insights into data and all manner of other things. Just before we get much further, I just wondered if you could just explain for our audience, just in case, what you mean by Gen AI, because there's lots of buzzwords around, aren't there?
Yeah, so it's really it's the term. It's a subset of automation, I should say, or of AI in the first instance. So generative AI is really just a model that we use. So you might see, as an example, you might have heard of tools like ChatGPT, which is one such tool that relies on Gen AI capability. And really, what it allows us to do is to really interact more freely with the automation, as it were. So almost to think of it as a person. So rather than having to change the way that you might ask a question to be very technical, we can interact it in quite a natural way, natural language, effectively, and it will then respond to us accordingly. So with that in mind, it means you have to be an expert in asking the perfect technical question to get the information out. We can ask the sort of questions we ask as BAs, and then we will possibly get the answers we need.
Yeah, and I think there was an interesting conversation that we had just before we started recording about the possibility of treating generative AI as another stakeholder, just another stakeholder, as an SME, someone that we can use to help do brainstorming. I know this is something a particular interest to you, Debbie. So have you got any particular thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it is really interesting. And I do support what John said. And I like the idea of thinking of AI and the tools within the AI field as an extra stakeholder that we can call on. If you think of a RACI, it's sort of the C, isn't it? We can consult these other stakeholders. And what's been interesting for me is using some of these tools has been quite sort of domain specific as well. And I look at some of the tools that are out there. I actually sign up to a weekly newsletter that keeps me updated on which tools are coming through. And when I look at them, some of them I think, okay, that's really interesting, but actually it's not particularly relevant to me. But I do think about if it could be relevant. Because I suppose the angle I always take is, can I leverage that to make things work better or more efficiently? But then occasionally you see a tool and you think, actually, that's got potential for what I'm trying to do in my business. And it must be the same, John, in financial services. You must be looking at certain tools and thinking, actually, that really ties in with the work that we do. So we can use that to improve some of the processes.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think there's a few examples that I can naturally think of. I mean, and they probably fall along, if we keep it simple. I mean, there'll be some examples where we can use the tool just for our transformation and our project work and our business analysis activities. But then there's also a lot of uses of the tool for financial services and other organisations themselves. So whether that's interrogating information, interacting with customers maybe directly, or with teams directly. We might see particularly trained bots, or the like, that people can interact with, really, to be able to get the information that they need. So an example I was thinking of this morning actually was that some places we work, there's reporting at different stages, and the reports tend to be potentially a flat report, but sometimes in more advanced areas you might see dashboards. But there's always questions about the data, or questions that have not been answered by what's presented on screen. And actually, if you've got capability on top of that data to ask some simple questions about, can we explore a particular number in a sector? Why are the profits gone up this month versus last month, and why are these numbers different? I think just being able to ask that question in a simple way will be quite powerful, I think, for business users that tend to currently probably rely on stopping things, getting their questions, sending them back to a BA, then the questions have to go to tech, and then they eventually get an answer in the next time they look at the report.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I remember reading up, I think it was a Harvard Business Review article, was about the use of machine learning in data analytics. And one of the challenges, I guess, with data, with trying to ask questions in data, is to know what questions to ask. So that's half the battle, isn't it? But one of the things it was saying in this article, and I think it was in the States, it was Harley Davidson had found some insights looking at their data, and what they actually found was a question that nobody would have thought to ask. And what it was that the wording that they used for specific adverts had a significant impact on the sort of sales closure rate, if you see what I mean. So they'd be putting out adverts out there, saying, call us. And then there'd be another one saying, click here and that sort of thing. And they found, I can't remember which way around it was, but there was a particular wording within the ads that led to significantly higher sales in the end. Now, they wouldn't have thought about, analysing down to that level of detail about, what words do we use and how effective are those words. So machine learning, by looking at the data, found a trend and then reported back on that trend. And it's almost like having another expert on your team, isn't it? That's a sort of automated data scientist almost. One of the other things,
quite interesting, isn't it? Sorry, just talking about that, because that makes me think of a few things. Firstly, this point about asking questions that are likely to offer relevant information, but also then understanding that you have to take the information and maybe play it through a further level of analysis. Because because we've used ChatGPT, I think it was, for certain activities, which is fantastic. And it comes back to what you were saying, John, that actually, you can speed up your work to improve certain aspects of work by using these tools. But we did have to filter it through a level of understanding and interpretation and application and change in order for it to be incredibly useful. And that actually required, dare I say it, some analytical ability.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, in the same way, it always makes me think of when, if we talk to a particular stakeholder about a situation, I can never entirely rely on the information as being accurate until I've taken other perspectives. And also, those perspectives we're all saying the same thing, that significantly raises my confidence levels. And in the same way is that AI is presenting information to us that others have suspected already or that we can prove, then that's all the more helpful. And sometimes it's just useful. I think to the example that was mentioned a minute ago, just useful using that technology to find the questions that we wouldn't necessarily have identified quickly.
Yeah. So it's not like another tool like a modelling tool or something like that. That's in a way sort of quite passive. This is quite an active additional tool to your BA toolkit, isn't it? In a sense. But I think there's another interesting point there. Building on what Debbie was saying, that sometimes you have to be careful and analyse carefully what answers you get when you ask those sorts of questions. There have been occasions where people have put in some very odd questions to Gen AI type applications and come back with some very bizarre answers and some completely ridiculous answers as well. So, there is a tendency sometimes for people to trust what a computer says. That it's almost the computer is always right, but it's not, and that could be a bit of a danger there, couldn't it? If we're not careful.
I think there's the opportunity in these tools actually to interact with them in the same way you would though with other stakeholders. In that, if I was to receive some information, I'd want to prove it. I'd want to ask, where did you get your source? Where's your source of that information? And actually, we've been experimenting with a tool very recently. And when we get information, we'll ask a series of questions to be able to make sure that information is as accurate as can be. And we still have to go and validate it, but we'll ask, for example, how confident are you in the accuracy of this information? Where's the source? What are the sources that you've used? What are the links to those sources? We even tried to try and get to almost like the section or the page or the chapter in some cases of where the information has come from, with varying degrees of success. So that ultimately you can take those sources, compare what you've seen or what you're getting back to actually determine, would you agree with that perspective? Because it's all basically interpretation of data and information, really.
I think there's another thing to perhaps have a bit of a think about. There's a lot of these AI tools that are free. So there's a version of ChatGPT, but you have to be careful because obviously it was trained, and GPT is, I think, generative pre-trained transformer. I think that stands for, doesn't it? It's trained on a huge knowledge base. A large language model, I think they call it. But when was it trained? And I think the free version is already out of date. And I think the last time I looked, it was, its knowledge base is like almost 2 years old now. So, if you're expecting it to be current and reflect on what's been happening within the last year or even 2 years, you've got to make sure perhaps that you're looking, and this is not a sales pitch, by the way, but you've got to be thinking, do we need to subscribe to something that is much more up to date and has a much bigger knowledge base? Otherwise, you're going to get a very narrow view, which I guess is reflective of stakeholders, isn't it? If you ask a stakeholder that has very out of date business practices and knowledge because they don't work in that area anymore, then you're going to get out of date information potentially.
It is interesting because you actually see organizations moving into using AI tools. I mean, I think we're talking about a very broad spectrum of tools with that term, by the way. But I mean, if you look at things like chatbots, okay, you can go on websites for some extremely large companies, and the quality of the tool they're using and the quality of the way they're using it is actually poor, really poor. And if you come back to looking at, tools learning from large learning models, then actually you do wonder with some of and I don't even know if they're proprietary tools, there may be, but some of them, you wonder how small the learning base is, if you like, the knowledge repository that they're actually working from, because they're not very good. And so I think at the moment, it's quite interesting to me that I look at things and think, and maybe I'd always think this, was a business analyst involved in looking at this? Because
That's your standard question, isn't it, Debbie?
my standard question. Sorry about that, guys. But when you think about it, you see these organizations have access to a lot of money, okay, coming up with search algorithms, chatbots that are really not very good. And so, they're using a form of AI, if you like, but either they're using it in a poor way, or they're not really understanding what customers want. And we come back to the business analyst at this point, don't we? And so I sort of think it's great to think about these tools as tools we can use. It's great to think about how they can help us to improve processes, but it's also great not to think, as long as we've got that, that's job done, and we don't need somebody to actually run some maybe scenarios through this and look at the world, I think, as you mentioned earlier, John, through different perspectives. That's my sort of take on what's happening with some of it at the moment.
I would agree. I mean, because I think potentially any one of us could tap into a tool, whether it's an enterprise version or just a free version that we've got. Ask a question, perhaps, of what is the business process that happens in a library, for example, and we'll get a response. And if I was employed as a BA within a library, I shouldn't just assume that what I've got from AI is an accurate view of that organisation, because that library, if I take it as an example, will have very particular customers, will have particular staff, will have a particular way of working, have challenges based on their wider structure and organisation and the systems they're already using. So we have to be careful not to apply a one-size-fits-all model, because every organisation, situation and stakeholders are different. And I think, going back to your point, Debbie, I think having that underlying BA expertise to appreciate that and to be able to interact with different stakeholders, take the wider view, and digest information from a variety of different dimensions and directions, and then figure out the right way forward with the help of the stakeholders is probably a safer bet, I would say, than relying on tools to do it for us.
And I think that's a good point. And there is a view, isn't there, or a fear, a general fear about AI, that AI is going to take over and replace everyone. Interestingly, when we first tackled AI, we actually had an AI avatar hosting the BA Brew. I can't remember exactly what number that was, but I'm sure. And so our producer will pop that into the comments at some point. And we asked the question, does a BA need to be human? And this is coming from a chat GPT engine. And the conclusion was, yes, it does. And that the AI wasn't going to suddenly replace everything that a BA does, but it could be used as a good tool to support and improve and enhance the work of the BA. And certainly that's the view I've always had, and I think it's shared by other presenters. I remember attending the session that Dr. Kitty Hung presented at the BA conference in September last year, and she was coming to a similar conclusion. We still need to use the human BAs for the things that humans are good at, and judgment and things like that. But we then use the tool for the things that tools are good at, which is processing huge amounts of information and consolidating that, to almost curate information within an organization, to speed up the process of analysis.
It does worry me slightly, though. I don't know what you think. If we look at machine learning and we look at things like large language models and this repository, trillions and trillions of repository of information, you do have incorrect information in there. You do have biased information in there. And what worries me a little bit is where people might think about it as giving the answer. And as business analysts, we know in any situation, there's always different views on things, but there's also different options. And I think, again, this is a factor that we can sort of pull into this. And again, it's that analytical, objective viewpoint where we can pull things together a bit more. And I can't at the moment see that not being needed, but I don't have a crystal ball for the future. Do you know what I mean? But that is something that does worry me, because I have, I've attended seminars where people were talking about bias in results, because there's only a certain view within the repository, and that's what you end up with. And if you're somebody who knows the situation, and you might know that particular domain or area or topic, then you can evaluate. If you don't, then it's much easier to just accept the results. And that, I think, it's back, I suppose, to the old argument with data, garbage in, garbage out. It's exactly the same argument. That does worry me a little bit, because I think if you don't have that objective thinking hat on, it can be easy to accept something at face value.
And it's interesting in terms of that analogy with data, because within data, we often talk about the provenance of data and the lineage. Where does it come from? What's the original source? Is that a trustworthy source? Has it been manipulated in order to give you some sense of comfort in terms of the accuracy and the validity of that data? We don't have that as yet with AI. All we're looking at is what it regurgitates back. But I've certainly tried in the past to ask it about its sources. Can you cite, a reference, a citation for that particular piece of information? And that's not available yet, which is, so it's shrouded in secrecy. Where is this coming from?
You'll be pleased to know in the newer version, or the enterprise version, that is there. So you can ask for the source of information. Yeah, which is pretty useful, because and quite timely. I was asking the same question this morning, actually, and it gives a bit more comfort that that the answers are there. And I think it was several months ago I was talking to someone about this, and what's interesting is that, yes, there's plenty of cases where we can use automation and AI for to improve things for sure, and speed up our process. But we have to make sure is that in order to ensure the information we get is accurate, if it's actually going to take us longer to validate the information we get from an AI source than it would have been to acquire it through some other means, then there's a very good argument to suggest probably we shouldn't be using it. We should use the more efficient ways of getting accurate information. And I think I use the word perspectives a lot, but I think if you've got to speak to the people that have the situations that you're doing the analysis for, the customers, people involved in the process, and if the way they work, or the organisation in which they work, are not aligned to the way that those that are fed into perhaps AI tools, then that's the situation. So you've got to adjust to what they actually need and what they do as best you can.
Yeah, one of Debbie's favourite words, that, isn't it? Perspectives, especially in the context of stakeholders and business perspectives. Yeah. Can I just
put myself on the record and play on that one?
Absolutely. I mean, can I just ask one other sort of question I've got on my list here? I mean, something that we did start to discuss again before we started recording, which was about the effect, the impact of all of this on the BA role, because I think the comment was made that BAs historically have not been necessarily the best people to take on board technology. Some still a little bit fearful, if you like, or cynical about technology. I mean, I've struggled over many years trying to teach people that data is a good thing in organizations, but let alone AI. So have we got a challenge there? I mean, do BAs need to completely change their outlook, change their skill set? What do we think?
I think BAs could do, certainly BAs, BA managers, BA leaders, definitely help with continuing to spread the word on what we do, the extent of what we do, the value of what we're doing, the benefits of having business analysts, benefits of doing analysis in a thorough and right way, if there is such a thing as a right way, just so that they can appreciate that you're not going to replace a BA, at least in the short term, with bringing a tool in. I think so. I think there's probably a responsibility on all of us as BAs, irrespective of level, or BA managers, or head of practice, wherever we are, to make sure that we're taking as much opportunity as we can to share not only with the BA community, but with the wider community, with our stakeholders and sponsors as well, so that they don't potentially make decisions that might remove BAs from the picture in certain circumstances. Because I have a view, possibly a biased one, but I have a view that if they were to remove BA from the picture, at least in the short term, there wouldn't be a positive outcome. And when I say the BA, I guess the BA activity is not necessarily the person.
Yeah,
There be multiple roles, but BA role.
I think from my perspective, I like to look at things like capability. I like to take a sort of a business architecture view sometimes. And if I look at, the business analysis capability that organizations have, or maybe should have, a capability encompasses a lot of different things, some skills and competencies, equipment, but also tools and other resources. And if you're going to have business analysis capability, you've got to have all of this. And the tools today aren't just modeling tools or spreadsheets or stuff like that. The tools today encompass a very wide variety. And coming back to something I said earlier, and sometimes they're quite domain specific, sometimes they're a bit more generic. But as a business analyst, at the very least, you've got to be aware of them, because if you're not, then that capability can be a bit undermined in certain situations. And I remember, Pete, something that came up at Assist last year, where we were talking about a particular issue we had with our digital content development, and then thought, actually, there's an AI tool that could help with this. And it helped speed things up. It removed a blocker very quickly. But if we hadn't been aware that that tool existed and the potential it offered, we would have missed it completely. And so there is that need, I think, for BAs to be comfortable with understanding not just their toolkit, but the technical toolkit that sits out there that reinforces their capability.
And I mean, we talk a lot about the BA competencies, don't we? And we say that, you've got behavioral skills, business knowledge. Well, actually, it's not just business knowledge here. It's now knowledge of the available tools and technologies out there. So it does broaden that, rather than just understanding about your business domain and your particular organization, as you say, being aware that there are these new, upcoming technologies and how they might be able to help with particular challenges within the business. John, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think always been an advocate of spending as much time up front in a project and throughout, in fact, of collaborating with the development team, the architects, those in technology more broadly, to try and find out from them, what applications or technical components they're building or they might recommend or they've used, to understand as well the sort of questions that I might need to ask on their behalf to help them identify what the right tools are or how to configure the tools that they have. And I think this feels like an extension of that. So, for example, if we are introducing emerging technologies in the same way that when we introduce any technology to an organisation, let's go and speak to the experts, the teams implementing it, the technology team, developers, to find out more about it. What is the capability of it? But actually, don't just don't stop there. Let's try and push the boundaries and ask, well, could it do this? Could it do more? Could we extend it? How can we configure it? What if the business changes? What if the business grows? And I think from those types of questions, hopefully the technology will develop in a way that's compatible with the way the business is developing. But I think, I guess to maybe answer the question as well, that we'll also learn as BAs, a lot about what the technology requires of us in the business and the type of questions that need to be answered from it.
Well, no doubt we could discuss this topic for the rest of the day and the rest of the week. It is a very hot topic. There's lots to talk about potentially, and we've only got a very limited amount of time here. So I'm sure this is not going to be our last AI brew. But just before we call it a day, just if I can go to you for final thoughts. So, Debbie, do you have some final thoughts first?
I just think, business analysts, we've had to develop and grow over the last 3 decades that business analysis has really been around as a discipline. I think this is another challenging area. We do have to do some learning, but then that's what we do all the time. And I think to move forward as BAs, we've got to really be prepared to learn and to adapt and to think, okay, how can I use this? How can I use this to do a really good job? Because that, to me, is the essence of it.
Excellent. And John, final thoughts?
I would totally agree. I mean, I was just thinking really that I don't yet consider myself an expert in AI, but I certainly consider myself more of an expert than I was yesterday. And if I can sort of continue that process, then I'm sure I'll feel a bit more better off for the result of it. And I think attending sessions like this is brilliant. It's a good way to learn more. I think for viewers of sessions like this, there's another excellent way, as well as sort of taking in some of the advice that we've been discussing, such as, broaden your horizons, speak to people, look out for the technology, and be prepared to learn and adapt, I think, as you said as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it's quite, my final thought is it's quite an exciting time. There's lots of exciting possibilities from AI. Keep abreast of what's going on as a BA, as we always do anyway. But also, just be slightly cynical about some of the things, and as you would do anything else, analyze what you're hearing, analyze what the technology, especially with these GPT chat type technology, analyze what it's telling you and think, does that make sense? Is that right? Do I want to validate that before I do anything with that? So yes, watch this space, because I'm sure our next one will have even more to talk about, because this is a very fast moving area, isn't it? Thanks very much, everyone, for listening. It would really help us if you could like or comment or subscribe to the BA Brew and to our YouTube channel. If you have any thoughts of any possible future BA Brews, we're always happy to hear your ideas. Please email us on babrew@ciskd.com.